You're listening to Psych with Mike. And remember, the book, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, has a ton more information in it that is corollary to the things that we talk about here on Psych with Mike. So pick up a copy and leave us a review on Amazon. That is super helpful. Subscribe to Psych with Mike on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts, and leave us a review on Apple if you would like, and that really helps out the show. And now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. I am your host, Dr. Michael Mahan. If you are in a relationship or just trying to communicate with another human being, then one of the things that I am sure you have realized is that people oftentimes don't agree on the actual events that objectively happened. And that's because your perspective is your reality. If you like the psychological content that you get here at Psych with Mike, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you don't miss out on any of our new material. Last week, I talked about an exercise called the tennis ball exercise that helps people to be able to communicate more effectively, to be able to feel understood, which is what connection is all about. When we feel understood, we feel connected. That doesn't mean that people have to agree with everything that we say. We don't have to agree with everything that they say, but we have to feel heard and understood. And I will put a link to that episode up here in the corner. But to illustrate my point today, I wanted to tell you a little story about my life. So my dad was a difficult man to have a relationship with. There were times when we didn't even know where he was. He disappeared for years and then popped up in New Jersey, and then we would have a relationship for a little while, and then I wouldn't know where he was, and then he popped up in Arkansas. And so for a period of time, I invested a lot of effort in trying to have a relationship with him, which fell on me. The onus of the work for that relationship fell on me. I would have to drive to Arkansas or call him. He would not ever drive here or call me. And some of that made me angry, and I was resentful, but I was trying to have a relationship. And so I accepted that it would be my responsibility to do the work. One day I was down in Arkansas and we were having a conversation, and I don't know why this came up, but we started talking about things that happened when I was younger. And when I was younger, I lived not a very healthy, not a very productive, not a very legal lifestyle. And I was talking about this time when I had gone to a concert. I had gone to see Def Leppard with my friend John. And when we came out of the Def Leppard concert, John's car wouldn't start. And so we crossed the street from the auditorium, went to a McDonald's, and called my dad. And I asked him to come pick us up. And he said, okay. He wasn't happy about it, but he came up there. And we got in his car and we drove off the lot and took John home. And then we were headed back to our house. And on one of the darker kind of rural roads going back towards our house, we ran into a car, didn't run into a car, but we passed a car that swerved over into our lane and kept flashing their lights on and off. And that was really weird. And my dad was pretty upset about this, but we slowed down, and about 150 yards later came this horse in full tack, clip-clopping up the road. And so these people had swerved over into our lane, flashing their lights to let us know there was a horse that we couldn't see. And had we been traveling down this road at 35 or 40 miles an hour and run into the horse, we probably would have died. So it was good that the people had done this. But the horse is clip-clopping up the road. We get out of the car and take the horse by the reins, lead him off the road and just tied him to a mailbox. We didn't know whose horse it was. There wasn't anybody claiming the horse. Now, I will say the next morning when we drove by, the horse was gone. I don't know if the horse untied himself and went home or if somebody found him, but I am assuming that the horse survived and was okay. But it was a really weird thing that we had experienced together and didn't really talk about until this day, years and years and years later down in Arkansas. And so I was talking to my dad and I said, hey, do you remember this story? And he said, yeah, but I didn't come and pick you up from a concert. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, I came and picked you up from jail. Now, the truth is, I, at that time in my life, had gotten arrested even somewhat frequently. And so it was not completely without any basis that my dad would have come and picked me up from jail. But I just have this absolutely vivid memory of going to the Def Leppard concert and having this experience on the way home. So who's right? And the truth is, we're both right. Because both of us would pass a lie detector test. If you hooked us up to a galvanic response monitor, which is what a lie detector is, both of us would pass the test because we both believed what we were saying, even though the circumstances of the stories that we were relating were completely different. That's what happens in our lives. We have perceptions. We filter the world in through our perceptual fields, through our ears, eyes, our noses, our ability to touch. We have these sensory organs which we get information through, and we mediate that in our brains, and we come out with a narrative story that we then convert into our DNA, coded into our DNA, and that's what long-term memory is. So all of us perceive through our sensory organs differently. We may mediate on the information differently. We may come to different conclusions. We may even report radically different stories that are true to us. But then we try and communicate with somebody else, and that person has a narrative that is true for them. And so when both of us are trying to communicate with each other, and remember, the most important thing is being understood. And we're trying to get a need met, like you have hurt my feelings and I would like to talk to you about it. But then when I relate to you the story, you come back at me and say, well, that's not what happened, right? This happens to me 100 times a day when I'm doing therapy. Very rarely do people ever agree on the actual objective reality of any event. And even when that does happen, what really is important is how that makes them feel. And so to be understood, to feel connected, we have to get by that. If all we are doing is trying to force the other individual to buy into our perceptions of reality, then we've already lost. We're not ever going to be able to communicate effectively, and we're never going to feel connected to the other person because we're too entrenched in requiring that person to accept and even buy into our versions of reality. So then I say, well, if you're not going to buy into my version of reality, then you clearly don't want to be in my life. And so then we are in separate camps. And that is oftentimes a chasm that is difficult to bridge. So what is the solution? The only solution is to accept that perception is reality. If somebody has a version of reality that is different from yours, you don't have to agree with them. You don't have to buy into that reality. You just have to accept that it's theirs. So with my dad and I didn't throw a fit. I mean, I just said, oh, okay. And I haven't changed my version of that story. I still believe that my dad came and picked me up from a Def Leppard concert. And I'm sure that he went to his deathbed believing that he came and picked me up from jail. The truth is that it didn't really matter which one of those things happened, but both of us were telling this story and laughing about it, and we felt connected and understood because we weren't necessary, or I didn't have to necessarily require him to buy into my narrative. And I knew that I wasn't going to surrender my narrative to make it more convenient for him. It's okay to do that. I've had people come to my office and talk to me about seeing Black Hawk helicopters, chasing them to the parking lot, and people rappelling out of the helicopter in black Kevlar armor to arrest them before they came into therapy. And had this individual say to me, well, you must have seen them. And I said, you know what? I didn't see them, and I don't currently see them. But I do recognize that if a person had that experience, that would probably be pretty frightening. Are you scared? And he said, hell yes, I'm scared. Okay, well, now we can talk about something that we both agree on. We understand what that means to be scared, and I understand how that experience would elicit that emotional reaction. So what we have to do is accept that each individual's reality is based on their perception. Listen to their perception. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to buy it. You just have to listen to it and accept that it is their reality. Again, we have a book out, Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, so we would love it for you to pick up a copy of that. I will leave the link in the description below. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. Leave us reviews on Apple Podcast. And if you do buy the book, leave us a review on Amazon. That would really help other people find the book. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.